And then, so I'm going to introduce almost Dr. Michelle Sandoval. And the reason I asked Michelle to serve as a content piece for you all is because she works with Dr. Mall, and Dr. Mall has said, this is how I want to see thematic coding. And so she's been put through the ringer several times. And so we're going to learn from her several time washing machine rigmarole. So Michelle, it's all yours.
Okay, well, thank you. And I'm just going to warn you now, because I was kind of a guinea pig in terms of trying to figure out how to do all of this, I actually did my thematic analysis and coding in several different ways. So while I was putting together this presentation, I tried to put it together in a way that makes sense. It was a little repetitive on my end, but I'm going to give you kind of the bigger picture, but I have a lot of examples and things I can pull up to kind of show you what my thought process was. So yeah, I didn't realize exactly how crazy it was until I was trying to put it together to present to everybody. So it definitely gave me a little bit of perspective of everything I was going through. So I used Clark and Braun, and those of you who are going to be doing a qualitative study may already be familiar with them. They wrote a great basically guidebook on how to do thematic analysis. And I can share this presentation with you, Dr. Quaid. I have the reference at the end of this. But they have very, very easy steps. And I use their basic steps. However, I only use that as a starting point. I did it how Dr. Mall told me to do it, with this in mind as just kind of just guidelines, and as well as citing the specific process, which you'll need to be able to back up the way you're doing your thematic analysis on recent literature. So I used their process, which is basically to listen to your transcripts, whether it's interviews or focus groups, however you're getting your qualitative data. You're going to want to listen to it. Just listen and take down your thoughts. Then you're going to listen and read the transcripts. And I'll get to that in a minute, because I had a great way I did that. And then reread. And you may need to do this a few times. I did it, I think I read through the transcripts 2 or 3 times fully before I actually tried to start coding my data. And it does seem like it's repetitive, but that's really important because it helps you become really familiar with your data, or getting to know it. And then you code the data. Then you combine the codes, identify patterns, and synthesize those patterns into themes. So it seems really basic, and it actually really is a pretty basic process. What gets difficult or more complicated is making sure that you stay organized while you're doing all of this. And so that is what I'll try to help walk you through. I also, Patton had also suggested using coding schema, which I did use in this. And what I did, I took it from a technological standpoint. I'm going to show you exactly how I used the coding schema and identifiers to make it really easy for me to sort through them on my computer and basically create my tables and looking at my data triangulation and everything. So I just had some tips and tricks I wanted to share with everybody in terms of the collecting and analyzing the data. So the first thing, and I have an example of my interview protocol, you'll want to design the interview protocol to follow your research questions and theoretical framework. If you set up the interview protocol ahead of time to be extremely structured, even if you're doing semi-structured interviews, which is what I did, your interview protocol can really help make it so that when you're going and looking at your transcripts, it almost just falls into place for you. So I will show you exactly how I did that by research question, which of course aligns with my theoretical framework. While listening and reading, before even starting to try to code the data, just jot down notes. There's going to be some aha moments, or I didn't realize they said that when I was doing the interviews, things like that. Just kind of keep mental notes or write them down in a notebook. That'll help you as you're coding later on. If you're using a software to transcribe, which I used Trint, and I was one of the first students, at least at GCU, to try to use the software. It's pennies on the dollar. I can't remember exactly how much I paid, but I didn't spend more than $100 on transcription service, and I had over 10 hours of transcribed interviews that I needed to do. So the audio files, I believe it was about 10 hours total, and I could swear I only spent maybe $80 versus it's typically what, I don't know, Dr. Quaid, $1.25 per minute to get a transcribed interviews, and that can add up very quickly. So this was a great service. The only thing about it is automated, so it's not perfect. But I actually use that to my advantage. So while I was getting to know my data, as I was listening to my interviews and reading the transcripts that I got from Trent, I was fixing them as I went along. But that was just another extra step for me, and it really helped me really get to know what was being said on those interviews. So that was just kind of a little thing that I didn't think about ahead of time, but actually worked out really well for me. I did not use software to do my coding or thematic analysis. I did everything by hand. Dr. Mall did not let me do anything with MaxQDA, so I actually don't know how to use it. And I know it's a brand new, beautiful software that GCU pays for, and I'm sure that everybody else will love this software when it comes time to use it. But what I do know is that even if you are going to use something like MaxQDA, which most students will use since we do pay for it at GCU, you still have to be able to teach the software what it's looking for. So you still have to be able to know how to hand code your data. That's really important. It doesn't create the codes for you. You still have to be able to figure out what those codes are. And another thing is that thematic analysis, it doesn't mean you're just counting up the number of times certain words or phrases show up. This is really important because some software or even services like SurveyMonkey, they'll offer to do that for you. They'll offer to do a qualitative analysis of your transcripts, and all that's doing is counting up how many times the word music showed up in that transcript. It doesn't necessarily mean it means anything to you. So just kind of watch out for that. Don't fall into that trap. So this is kind of what my interview protocol looked like. I hope everybody can see it okay. Here we go. I'm just moving my video screen here. Hold on. There we go. Okay, so I used an interview protocol that Dr. Mall provided to me. And I don't know if Dr. Quaid, you have seen this before. It looks a little bit different on my dissertation. I just pulled out what you can look at here. I organized my questions by research question in my dissertation. I have 6 research questions. The first one is actually more of a quantitative, so I left that out of this. But research questions 2 through 6 are involved around how factors of resilience contributed to online doctoral success. And the different factors, I used a 3-dimensional model of psychological resilience, and then I also added a what other factors might be involved. And so that was my 6th research question. So these questions are all around social support. And within social support, there's different sources of social support, or just different types. And so my research or my interview questions are in this 3rd column, and literally just looking at what different types of sources were there, what kinds of social support. And then there were probing questions, and this is because you're going to have your basic questions, but then you need to ask probing questions to keep the conversation going, and that's why this is a semi-structured interview. I had basic questions to start with, and then I went from there, and some of my interviews went off in all sorts of directions that I wasn't expecting. So, which was great. That's what I wanted. So, and this is just an example of my research questions 3 and 4. I didn't have as many, but that's because these 2 research questions were actually from the same dimension of resilience. I just split them up because I anticipated that I might need to do some extra coding between the 2 different subdimensions within this. And then my 6th research question, I predicted some of the factors that I might find based on the literature. Self-efficacy, autonomy comes up a lot in resilience literature. And then I also added spirituality for a couple reasons. One of them is it does come up in resilience, but also we're a Christian university and that's my sample base. And so I figured I should probably take a look at that and see if that had an impact. So that was in here. Now, the reason I wanted to show this to you is because by setting up my interviews in this manner, when I looked at my transcripts, it was almost like the codes just kind of popped out of the woodwork. It made it very, very simple for me to be able to figure out what I was looking at, identify those codes, and start organizing them. So the data preparation step, which is to listen, read, reread as many times as it takes. These are just the basic steps. To listen at least once without reading the transcripts. Just write down your thoughts. Read them while listening a second time. I recommend reading them a third time without listening to the interview. That way you can kind of just wrap your head around the words. And like I said, take down the notes, keeping in mind those research questions in your theoretical framework. You may hear or read things in the transcripts that had nothing to do with your research questions. Definitely write those thoughts down, because you may want to use those as unexpected findings later on, which is what I did. I found some really cool stuff. So coding the data, this is the fun part. Now, I'm a techie. I love the computer. Not everybody does. However, what I did is something pretty basic, and anybody who has basic knowledge of Word should be able to do this. I used Microsoft Word and the comments, which you all know bubble comments. I'm sure you have lots of them on your feedback that you get from your committee members. I used comments to be able to search for my codes and start organizing them. So this was really a great method. My codes, I identified them by research question. And so I just provided kind of my schema here on how I did this. So SS1, for example, is from my research question 2. SS equals social support, which is that research question. 1 was just the code level, and I had codes 1 through 10, 12, 13. And then the actual code itself for this one was family or peers and cheering. So that was just one code that I developed. That was the first one I found. So that's why it's number 1. That's the only reason why it's number 1. The second code I found, you can see this down here, is SS2, family and not understanding. And what that means is a lot of family and friends didn't really understand what doctoral students were going through. However, it was either a form of social support or the lack of support. And so that's why I identified that as a code. What's really important is don't just highlight. So I could have highlighted just not really understanding and left it at that. Don't do that. You'll want to highlight the entire sentence or even that entire paragraph, depending on what it says. If you just highlight not really understanding, you're not getting the full context. So when you go to look for that code, you're only going to get not really understanding. Not really understanding what? Why is that important? So highlight the entire sentence. And that's where some of the softwares can get you into trouble, is that they only highlight that tiny little piece and you don't have the full context of what's going on with that phrase.
So Michelle, before you go on, I just want to point out that when you're interviewing, if you get a statement from somebody that is very general, you must keep probing until you get more specifics. Because if you said, oh, I love the training. Well, what a part of the training did you love? Or
yes,
you describe more aspects. So it's like you've got to drill down during that interview, because if you lose that moment, that opportunity with the participant, you have lost the opportunity to get some really good data. So
absolutely. And I had some participants who were very chatty. I honestly, I think I had one participant who she answered almost all of my interview questions without me actually asking them. It was amazing. And that was the best interview because I got so much out of it. And it was a little bit more disorganized. It didn't fall into place as clearly as maybe some of my other interviews. However, I got a lot from that interview and a lot of things that I wasn't expecting. This one, of course, I didn't provide the rest of the interview. This was actually just one full excerpt from her interview. And I got 3 codes out of just this little piece. But if you were to look at her transcript, the whole page is coded like this.
And before you go on, we have a question from Frank. Fran.
Well, it's more of a comment than a question. So I don't know if people that are going to do interviews, if you have a lot of experience with it. I'm a psychiatric nurse, so my job is to get people to tell me things all day long. And one of the things that I find is very, very easy to do, and it might be very helpful for folks, is to just ask them if they say something, oh, I thought that was really fun, say, tell me more about that. Tell me more about what makes that fun for you. And if you use a couple of skills, one of them is called reflection, and one of them is called, oh God, now I'm going to blank. I do it every day. Reflection, restatement is another one that you can use. If you just say, oh, tell me more about that, and you can get a lot out of people, more than you know.
Absolutely. Thank you, Fran. And that's exactly what I did. You know, I interview quite a bit, you know, in my positions, in my career, I do interviews all the time. And so this came pretty easily to me, and it's not going to come easily to everybody. One of the things that you will want to do, and I didn't mention this, is you will want to run your interview through at least a couple people ahead of time. I had, of course, the luck of knowing people who would typically be in my sample that I didn't use because I know them so well. And so I used them to test my interview out on before I actually started collecting my official data. And it really helped me to make sure that the questions I was asking first were meaningful, that they were the right questions to ask, and also that they meant, that the participants would be able to understand what I was asking for. That way I didn't spend too much time trying to clarify what exactly I meant by my question. So that really helped clean it up. One thing I did, and I learned this after the fact, so not all of my transcripts look like this, but when you're doing the color coding, I didn't use highlighting. There's a function in Word, it's the paint function instead of the highlight function. The reason being, the paint function, you can pretty much have any color on the entire spectrum of colors possible. And you may end up having a lot of codes. The highlighted only gives you 9 colors. So that's something important. And I knew that right away because Dr. Mall gave me that heads up. But another thing is that when you're in Word, if you're clicking on a comment, it highlights this part. So this yellow part actually goes away. And so what I ended up starting to do was I started highlighting the comment the same color, so that when I went to go print this out later on, I had the color somewhere. Because I realized when I was trying to find these, when I clicked on the comment, the color went away. And I can show you an example of that. I mean, it's just kind of frustrating when you spend a lot of time trying to color code something and it doesn't work the way you planned. So thankfully I figured this out after a couple interviews and I was able to go back and fix them. So when I was coding the data, I started creating my code book, and I used a table. I'm really good in Excel in terms of tables, and so I use that. You can use Word. You can even handwrite them down until you're ready to input them, whatever works best for you. But one of the things that you'll want to do is just make sure that you're tracking them. And you may reuse codes. You may build upon the codes. This SS1 family peers cheering, it got a little bit longer and a little bit longer. And there are other ways to code. Some will do subcodes, and maybe SS1 has SS1-A, SS1-B. I chose to do it this way where I didn't use subcodes, I just put them all together. So it's really what's going to work best for you. This is just what worked best for me. And then each level of the code, level of code will be the same color. So for example, my research question 2 was social support. My research question 3 was adaptive coping or optimism. The level 1 code was also yellow. The level 2 code was green. The level 3 code was blue. And I have some examples of that to show you. So this is kind of what it looks like. I did my best. This isn't exactly what I ended up using, but I had to kind of format it to get it into a PowerPoint. So this is a very, very condensed version of my coding table. So you'll see these are my model components on the left-hand side, and then these are the codes with the colors. And this is where it starts getting really repetitive. I've created several different versions of this table, and I ended up using all of them in some manner, so it worked out. I wasn't wasting my time, but you may find that you're creating quite a bit as you go. Yes, it's very pretty. And then what I did, let me see, I'm gonna go to the next page. There we go. Okay, so this is the next step in the evolution of my coding table. I counted out how many times these codes occurred in my interviews. Now, I was lucky. Before I did my interviews, as part of my sampling, I had sent out a survey, and I had the participants complete a resilience scale, and then I had also added just some open-ended questions. It was only a few. And the only reason I put them in there was, first, I wanted to find out if anybody was willing to complete an interview. Those were a couple of the questions. And then I just had a few questions on just asking about their experiences during their doctoral program. Did anything happen? Any negative life events or positive life events? Things like that. I didn't really expect to get anything from those. And so they were only going to be used as a way for me to do some purposeful sampling for my interviews. However, when I got my surveys and I looked at my questionnaires, they were packed with text. I mean, these graduates, you could tell they really were excited about filling out this questionnaire, because I have pages and pages of questionnaires. So that was really cool, and I actually was able to end up using it in my thematic analysis. That wasn't originally in my plan. So that's an example of sometimes it's going to change a little bit as you go. I ended up having an additional data source that I wasn't expecting. So what I did was I added up exactly how many times the codes showed up in the interviews and how many times they showed up in the questionnaires. And the only reason I did that was to start identifying some of the stronger themes. This was just kind of the first step in terms of identifying my patterns. And you can see some of these, they came up quite a bit. The verbal and emotional, physical support, that was a pretty common one. And then self-discipline came up a lot. And I'm sure you all know that. You got to be self-disciplined to get through this program. So that came up quite a bit in the questionnaires. But interestingly, it actually didn't come up as often in the interviews. So that was kind of an interesting thing for me to find. And one of those things I actually started looking at was, if something came up more in the questionnaires versus the interviews, I took a look at that as I was developing my chapters 4 and 5, because some of those indicated different levels of willingness to share, or remembering, or just making those connections. So then I started combining the codes. And as I said, you're all going to have your own way to do this. Some I know have glued their different excerpts onto sticky notes and stuck them up on their wall and started moving them around. I'm sure some of you have done that for your literature review. And that is something to, if you wanted to compare doing a thematic analysis to anything, it's a lot like writing your literature review and putting together the themes from your literature. I didn't realize how similar it would be. So if you had a method that worked really well for your literature review, that might work really well for organizing your codes into patterns and themes as well. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. So I had one of my classmates, she talked about, literally, she took up her entire dining room and filled her dining room with just stacks of sticky notes or cards with different, this was for her lit review, but the literature that she had found, and organizing it, and starting to create little Venn diagram areas and things like that. If that works for you, that's great. I printed out all of the color-coded transcripts, and I just started piecing them together based on my research questions. It's really difficult to explain how I did that, because a lot of it just came out of my head as I was doing it. And that you're going to find, you're just going to start seeing patterns. If you look up examples of thematic analysis, you're going to find all sorts of different mind maps out there, and lines all over the place, and it can get really, really complicated. I tried to keep it as simple as I could, and I think one of the ways I was able to do that was because I had already structured my interviews in a way that allowed me to keep it organized. And I'm very process oriented, so that worked well for me. Might not work so well for others. You definitely want to keep track of where the codes are fitting. I had a lot of codes that were technically under my research question for optimism, and they ended up applying more to a theme that ended up in my social support, amazingly. And so you're going to find that happen, and don't restrict your codes. Don't say, nope, that code belongs in research question 3. I'm not moving it anywhere else. No. That's the whole point of this process, is that there's going to be times when a piece of a transcript that you coded a certain thing really applies more to a different research question or a different dimension within your study. So definitely don't restrict yourself. It also may apply to more than one. You may have one code that really, or even one excerpt, one specific quote could apply to several different research questions. And that's where you start finding some overarching themes. So just definitely don't restrict yourself with that. And then this one's really short because I just have some examples. So then I just started identifying commonalities, patterns among the different codes. And this is where I was saying, you're going to see ones that pop up under, like my theme of tangible support. And then tangible support was, I defined that as help around the house. Husband taking the kids so that mom could work on her dissertation, or vice versa. Friends helping out with carpool. Things like that, just ways that others in their lives took over responsibilities so that they could focus on their dissertations. That was a really big theme. And I wish I would have learned that sooner for myself. Asking for help depending on others. And this was my optimism and coping research question. But I put that in my research question having to do with social support. They had to learn how to ask for help and depend on others in order to get that support. So that's where some of those codes started migrating across the different research questions. So this is just an example of one of the pages of my 26 pages of coded data that I have. And this is just from my first one, the social support. This is across multiple interviews. This is not just one person. This is several different. I used just a basic identifiers, 1-C. You could give them a nickname, give them just an identifying code, whatever works best for you. That just worked for me. Thankfully, mostly everybody had a name starting with a different letter, so that helped. But and that just helped me because I'm not very good with tying numbers to people, and so having their initial allowed me to remember, oh, that was so and so, and that was just kind of in my own brain. So what I did was I pulled all of those, and this is where another thing I wish I would have learned ahead of time. You see a lot of these don't have the colors on the comments. And that's because I hadn't learned it yet at that point that you should probably color code the comments too, not just the text. And that's where you'll see some of these up here. The comments are color coded. So that would have helped later on just from a technical standpoint. But so what I did was I organized these. This is actually on a publisher file. I found that was the easiest because it's very forgiving with formatting. All I needed was I got this page. There's a ton of these, and I printed them out, and I snipped each of these excerpts into their own little piece. And that's when I started organizing them. And that's where you could glue them to stickies, or put double-sided tape, or just make stacks, or whatever works best for you to organize them. I just made little stacks. Did I go too far? No, I didn't. Okay. So then as I was developing these codes, my code book started evolving. These were the number of instances by participant. Earlier I showed you just the summary, but this is where I saw whether it showed up multiple times in an interview or just once. How many times total it showed up in the interviews, then the questionnaires. And this is where you're going to use this to really help you write your chapter 4. When I went to go write my chapter 4, because of all these steps that I had completed and ahead of time, it actually became really simple and really easy to write that chapter 4. And I'll show you why in a minute. But what you're going to do is you're going to define those codes. What do those mean? And these are actually very likely going to be almost exactly word for word what you end up putting in your chapter 4 when you're describing your thematic analysis process. And then you're going to want to put examples of transcript quotes that apply to those codes. Only put the important ones. Some of them you're going to find later as you're looking at them that some of them aren't really that great, and that's okay. That's the whole process. But you'll want to find those ones that are they really get to the meat of what you're trying to convey with that. And you're going to want to provide those examples. I only included one on here just to make sure they fit, but I have 2 to 4 examples per code on my actual book. And I just wanted to show you, this is what an actual transcript page looked like. So this was an excerpt from one of my earlier interviews, and this was, I don't know how many minutes of talking, about 5 minutes. And you can see he was one of my talkers. I didn't have to ask him very many questions, and he just gave me all sorts of information. So as you can see, and I got a lot of really good codes out of that. And I know it's probably kind of hard to see what those codes are, but there was a lot of social support. I think this was earlier in the interview. I think almost all of these are social support. So this is just what it looked like, and that's where I have, I think, 26 pages single-spaced of just pure transcripts that are coded. And that was off of about 70, 80 pages of single-spaced transcripts. So then I started creating my tables that I'm actually using in my chapter 4. And this was after I had started working out my themes. Now with my themes, I wanted to show you this because as you can see, some of these are going to have more than one source of code in them. So emotional support, this was research question 2. So this is all my social support themes. I had 3 themes. You'll likely have 2 to 3, maybe 4 themes per research question, just depending. I ended up with 13 themes total across all of my research questions. So my chapter 4 is pretty lengthy. I believe it ended up about 65 pages, but that's just what I came up with. So, you know, and it was just a lot of information. So this was just how I showed my triangulation for that it didn't just show up in interviews all the time. Sometimes a lot of them showed up in both my interviews and my questionnaires. So it's just a visual of those. What's next? That was it for the PowerPoint, but I wanted to show you all some examples. But does anybody have any questions before I do that?
There was one question about do you put this data in a code book in your appendix?
So from what I've been told, you can't put everything in your appendix. There would be a lot. Like I said, I have 26 pages of coded data. And so what I have is, let me see, I had pulled up some examples of some things that I can show you. They just wouldn't fit on a PowerPoint, so I had to kind of and this is a work in progress. This isn't done yet, so forgive me, but I can at least show you kind of what it looks like. So this is an example of my code book, early stages. It's a little bit smaller than it actually ended up. And if I scroll down, you'll see it's quite long. I think if I tried to condense it down, I don't even think it would fit on a Word page. So I've been figuring that part out. A lot of these things I'm going to be uploading to my LDP under one of my folders, so that if peer review wants to go in and take a look at them, they can. But I'm only going to be uploading the pertinent information into my appendices. What do those who may want to replicate my study down the road, or you know, who need to be able to cite it, what do they need to know to take a look at the validity of my study? They don't necessarily need to see all of this. What they're going to need to see is the interview protocol. They're going to need to see my coding table. So I have a theme table. This is my theme table. And I actually put this in my dissertation. I was able to figure out a way to condense it down and make it pretty and fit in an APA table. It was not easy, but I made it work somehow. And so this is a really long but good visual of all of my themes, the codes leading to those different themes, and where they appeared. So this is in my dissertation. But for the most part in the appendices, I'm going to have maybe just examples of some of the transcript quotes, but not everything will be in there. It's just too much. And it really would end up, people would have to sort through the weeds, and they don't want to have to do that when they're reading your dissertation.
Nice.
Let me see. So when I was showing you on the PowerPoint the examples of my transcripts, it looked like this when it was all said and done. And like I said, this is on Publisher. And the reason is Publisher is very, very forgiving. It doesn't give you margins that you have to deal with, and it doesn't try to format things for you. It just kind of lets you do whatever you want. So if you're trying to use your computer to organize codes, Publisher's a great way to do it. Or PowerPoint. I've noticed PowerPoint's really easy too. But if you try to use Word, it tries to control where you can put things. So I gave up on Word. But you'll see that I have it's 26 pages. And this is all, it's very pretty, all in my codes. All the way through. just for each interview. And then I also had organized them by where is it? Hold on. I should just share. I don't know why I'm not just sharing my desktop. There we go. Okay. So these were my ones that I actually organized them by code. So these are all my social support 1 codes before I printed them out. That really made it easier to start organizing them once they were printed. So there's about 40 pages of this. But that's just because of the way that it's formatted. So, and then what kind of helped with this is I was also able to see, you know, oh, I thought this was really important, but then it was really only one person who talked about it. So maybe it wasn't as important as I thought. It was one of those, oh, this is going to be really cool, and then nobody else talked about it. So it was great for that person, but maybe not significant enough for me to mention in my study. So there was one that I actually did find that was significant to that person. Nobody else talked about it, but I think I might still put it in there just because it was really cool, and he was talking about journaling and writing every single day and reflecting on his experiences. And so nobody else talked about it, which was weird to me because I thought that might actually come up quite a bit. But I'm going to try to fit that in somewhere just because I thought it was really cool. That's why qualitative studies are really cool, because you have a little bit more leeway. But a lot of these I didn't end up using just because, or I combined them. You know, maybe, you know, this church support and prayer, it didn't show up a lot, but I ended up using this, and I kind of just combined it in with a lot of my social support codes when I ended up organizing my themes. Because even though technically it was a different source of support, church support can be very different than support from your family, but it still ended up in one of those themes. So that's where you have to keep an open mind. I originally thought this was going to be a different factor, but it really ended up in that first research question. And then,
so just as a comment for people as you're going to the next one, it's you may come across an AQR reviewer that wants to see all your data.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like,
that's why I have this.
Yeah.
I have this all in a folder. And I'm going to put all in my LDP. That way, but I'm not putting all this in my appendices. That would be crazy. So nobody wants to see all this. It's really messy, honestly. But when an AQR, when one of the reviewers says, well, did you really have all those codes? Did they really say that? You can say, yep, here you go. And you can hand them that folder, and it's all there, and they can sort through it. So
very smart, very smart.
Absolutely. And then I just figured I had included examples of the interview protocol, but this was mine, and it basically, this is what helps establish the internal validity of my study. Because it's a qualitative study, I'm not looking for external validity. I know this won't be able to be generalized to other schools or other types of doctoral graduates. Theoretically, it could be, but in reality, it's not. And so I'm really seeking some strong internal validity. So this is my step-by-step process. That way, if somebody wanted to go and replicate my study, they could do it. And this is going to be in my appendices. This is actually Appendix D. So it's the whole steps, ethical considerations, and then it starts with the interview questions. And that's what I had showed you on the PowerPoint. This is all just the same. And then after that, I had my closing questions and the summary closing. And then these are my field testing and all of that. I vetted my interview through my content expert, Dr. Hadley. He took a look at it just to make sure that I wasn't missing anything from a theoretical perspective. And that's really important to do, is to have kind of an expert panel take a look at your interview questions and make sure, and somebody that's, a committee member is great, but somebody who's not on your committee as well, because it's really important to get that fresh perspective. So I just saw it, some people that I work with. So let's see, any other questions?
Yep, let's open it up for questions. I'm going to unmute all until I hear too noisy. Okay, I hear somebody too noisy. If you aren't going to talk, then mute yourself.
Michelle, did you use memoing at all?
I did, and I thought I would end up using them more in my final analysis, and because my original purpose for memoing was to help me with eliminating bias. I work at GCU. I've worked for GCU for 8.5 years, and so one of the concerns brought up when I was going through IRB was how am I going to overcome any possible bias I may have. I even was an academic counselor for some of the potential people that I would have been interviewing. And so one of the ways I was going to overcome that was the use of memoing and bracketing, and really just separating out my prior experiences with what's actually being said in the interviews. And so what I did with the memoing is I do have a notebook that I wrote everything down that I was just thinking while they were talking. And then when I went back to look at the interviews, and I was coding, I would refer back to my notes just to make sure that it wasn't some preconceived notion that I was pulling out of that interview. And that really just helped me just compartmentalize. And memoing can be used as a data source. I didn't really end up having it as a data source, but it can be your observations. If you're doing a focus group or a face-to-face interview, it's really good to be able to have that because you're going to be recording it, right? But it's good to write down observations about facial expressions or fidgeting or certain things that you might notice that aren't going to necessarily even show up on a video, or just the general just feeling in the room if it's a focus group. Did everybody kind of look at each other when you asked that question? Things like that you may want to think about later. So I didn't have that since everything was on video, but so I used it more just for my own personal just thoughts.
All right, I'm going to jump in with another question since nobody else is. Did you also keep a journal to record the decisions you were making during your data analysis?
What do you mean?
Well, for instance, I guess I can give a personal example. As I'm coding, I may realize that the code I've given it is not quite accurate, and I need to go back and change it. And so I will make a note of that in my journal so that, 3 weeks down the road, when I say, why did I put that code in there? I can backtrack and remember why I did it. I guess it's really for people with faulty memories like me.
Yeah, what I did, I didn't put it in a journal. I ended up kind of just putting it off to the side in my notes, with my table, or that's where you kind of saw some of those codes building on each other. And then when I was organizing into themes and I realized some of those codes maybe didn't really apply, I did kind of recode some of those. But for the most part, it was more I just reorganized them. I maybe kept the code there because I had it there for a reason. And then I may have just moved it under a different research question. But I didn't really journal it. I didn't think about it. I probably should have. It didn't cross my mind to try to keep track of those thoughts. And I will tell you that you should do that, because as I was trying to put together this presentation, I was thinking, what was I thinking when I did that? So mind you, I've been working on my, I got approval to collect data a year ago. So I've been working on this for a year. Yeah. And, and I've had a lot of things happen in between then and now that were completely independent of my school. And so, it's not because it has to take a year. I would say probably it's solid several months of me going through this. After I coded everything, I had to step away from it for several weeks.
Yes,
it was really overwhelming. Yeah. And that's okay. It's okay. I call myself a binge writer. I will spend 2 or 3 days writing all day, those 3 days, and then I have to take 2 weeks off because I just can't touch a keyboard anymore. So, and I had a lot of moments like that, but you will get through it. It's just sometimes it can be really, really overwhelming. So you just have to take a step back.
You've done really good work here, and I really think that this presentation should be shown to all beginning doctoral students that want to do qualitative research because they think it's easier.
So on that note, I have been very blessed to have several mentors throughout this program, including Dr. Quaid. She taught a couple of my classes, and then I've had Dr. Lori Wieters. Bless her, but I have yet to forgive her for suggesting that my topic really aligned better with a qualitative case study. because I am a numbers person through and through. I do not, I like people and I like talking, but I don't like thinking about it. And so when she said qualitative case study, and I remember going into that night of class when I had to present my qualitative case study topic, and Dr. Quaid said, "So why are you doing that?" And I couldn't tell her. All I knew was that Dr. Wieters told me to. I don't know
Dr.
if you remember.
Wieters said so.
She said so, and I had to go and learn this entire new method. And looking back on it, I'm really glad I did it, because I think I learned a lot more about myself and about writing a dissertation. And if I ever become a chair, I know how to do quantitative analysis. I knew that to begin with. I've taken so many stats classes, I can't even, it's sick how many stats classes I've taken, because I'm just a math nerd. So having to learn this process from the ground up, it really made me a better scholar. And it was uncomfortable at times. I still feel like I don't know what I'm doing with it, but now I'm definitely a stronger scholar because of it. And so, and one thing I tell incoming students, and I know you all probably have figured this out by now, is don't let your preferred methodology pick your way. You have to let your way pick your methodology. And so, you can't, there's just going to be times when qualitative is best and times when quantitative is best, and qualitative is definitely not easiest. I think it might be easier from a conceptual standpoint, but it's lengthy. It takes a long time. Yes.
So I noticed that Carlos is not muted. Did you have a question?
Not really, but I appreciate your presentation. I learned a lot from your presentation. I did something similar like you, questionnaire, interview, and focus group. And I used the same material. Dr. Quay helped me a lot, but also Pastor Timothy Griffin, he helped me a lot too. Dr. Quaid, Dr. Moll, Dr. June Moll helped me a lot too. So she suggested me to use the trend.
Trent, yes. Which actually, I have that pulled up. I can show you all if you want to see what it looks like.
I did it. I use it. I use it. I already collect data, and I did the coding and everything. And I sit down one Saturday at Panera with Dr. Moll, and she was telling me to write the story. And then I sit down a lot with Dr. Quay. So I'm excited, because for me, when I see this, I can see more how I can defend myself. Sometimes I don't have too much words. I know Spanish and Portuguese, and English is my new language, and sometimes I feel limited to defend myself sometimes. And when you say, oh, everything in the code came from the question and everything, I'm just like, I shouldn't. Sometimes I don't have the imagination in English to defend myself, but soon I have to do it. I saw you defending yourself, talking about how you're supposed to, how everything was lined up. I know that I did it like you. You did a better job than me. I believe so. But that was pretty much the same idea. But sometimes I don't know how to, come up. Sometimes they can, especially AQR, come up with this question and just like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. So sometimes, but after saw your presentation, I have kind of more resources to defend myself.
Good. I'm glad.
When they come out with this question, when they come out with like, oh, but how about this? I will be like, it's first time, like you say, first time you're doing something, first time that you feel like rookie and you don't feel 100% sure that what you're doing is correct. I just did Saldaña. That's the only difference that I did. I called a Dr. Jason Ward. He suggested me Saldaña, so I picked Saldaña. But it's pretty much the same idea: thematic coding and reading and listening, and then coding, find patterns. But yeah, just feel me. Thank you, because I feel more secure. What I did, I'm in the correct way. Right now, I'm in AQR, but I don't know if I did a good job in my coding and everything. So right now, I feel I did okay. I should feel more secure. Yeah.
Good, I'm glad. It's hard to know. And that's, trust me, I've lost a lot of sleep at night thinking I did it all wrong. So
Yes.
it does start coming together though eventually.
Show everyone about Trent.
So this is Trent, and I honestly haven't even looked at it in months. I think it was in beta when I used it, but now I think it's I think that it worked so well for them that now it's not in beta mode anymore. So this is what my Trent account looks like, and you can buy credits. So if I wanted to go buy credits, no, I wasn't really on a trial plan. I started out with a trial plan. It used, and I don't know if they still do this, but they give you 30 minutes of audio free, so you can try it. If they still do that, I actually used that. My test interview that I did was 28 minutes, and so I was actually able to use that as a test to make sure Trent worked for me. So I don't know what the costs are anymore. It's different. Here we go. So you can pay as you go, which is $15 an hour, versus potentially $60 an hour. Or if you know that you're going to have, let's say if you know you're going to have 20 hours, you may end up wanting to do, something else, 30 hours. So I just paid by the hour. I did, they had like a 3-hour purchase or something like that. It wasn't 3 hours a month, but it was something else. The plans have changed, but it's definitely worth the money in the savings. What I ended up having, let me see. So when you upload the file, you just upload an MP3 or MP4, really, really easy. It gives it to you like this. You can go through and you can edit as, as you're listening. It gives you the option to listen to it. It gives you soundbite areas, where in the interview. It's pretty cool. And then you can export it to Microsoft Word. You can export the entire document, and you can pick your format, which I don't even know what these are, so Word. And it saved me so much time. The only thing with it is an automated software, so it's not going to be perfect. I think it probably uses something like DragonSpeak, which is why it's so inexpensive. And so some of these are a little bit more cleaned up, but some of these were really messy to begin with. And so one of the things I learned in my test interview was that I have to prepare them for the interview. I had to tell my participants, I need you to please speak clearly. Don't speak faster or slower than you normally would. Just speak clearly, enunciate. And I kind of gave them those preps. I said I am digitally recording this so that I can do a digital transcription. So if you can try to just speak clearly, and I also warned them I'm going to mute myself while you're talking just to eliminate background noise, things like that, to just make sure that my audio files were clean. And that really helped when it came time to upload them. But I have to tell you, it worked so well. And for $15 an hour, I was more than happy to go back through and fix some of the typos. So, and that's where it came in. I used that as an opportunity to just get to know my data better.
So your interviews were on Zoom?
Yep, I use Zoom, just like what we're doing right now. And I recorded it, and then I have a folder of all the recordings, and then I have a folder of all the transcripts and all the coded transcripts. It's all in one place. Zoom, I have to tell you, it was such an amazing feature for me, because what's nice about Zoom is, let's say your computer crashes and you lose everything. Zoom keeps it for you. They keep your recordings on the cloud. So you can go back and re-render those recordings if you lose them. So that was, thankfully didn't happen to me, but it was reassuring to know that I could go back and retrieve those if I needed to.
Looking to see if there's anybody else that has a question. Unmute yourself if you do. Looking. No big questions. They don't realize that they should have questions yet.
It's so funny. I had to, one of the instructors at residency had asked me to present my thematic analysis or my coding. And this was I don't know, 9 months ago. And I stumbled through that so bad. I had no idea what I was talking about. And, so just that is something to keep in mind, because you will have to defend it. Is anytime anybody asks you, talk about it. Talk about what you're doing. Explain to them how you did it. Even if they're not really that interested, just keep talking. Because it will help you become more comfortable explaining it. Explain it to your family members because they have no idea what you're talking about. And then they're going to ask you questions that you never would have thought of, and that will help you better defend yourself. So,
Michelle.
Yes.
If you can hear me, this is Bill. I have like 3 quick questions.
Okay.
Let me work backwards. I'm looking at Trent, and I see that it's identified names of the participants to the interview process. Did you assign those, or how do you assign those? Like Michelle, Bill, Michelle, Bill.
I assigned them. I can go through and I can type in, let's see, let's say William instead, and then you click it as a speaker. And it is pretty smart. It picks up on vocal differences, and so once I trained it to know who was who, it kind of picked up on that. But typically, I think what it started is it looked like speaker 1, speaker 2.
And I'm not going to.
And I was able to just know to go back and change those names.
So it works really well with an interview. Did you also use it for any focus group discussions?
I did not do focus groups, so but I imagine it probably works very similar.
And then going back to your proposal stage, I had a question regarding the code book that you. It's really going to be a sample at that point rather than being the actual. So what did you do? Just kind of theorize or come up? You faked one as what you were hoping you would get, because you really don't know until you've collected.
Yeah, no, I didn't do anything with the code book in my proposal. That was where my semi-structured interview protocol came from, or that's why I had that. So you'll want to do the interview protocol, but it is not expected that you have codes developed ahead of time. That would kind of be cheating.
I agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have ideas. Obviously, I knew I was going to get social support codes, but what I didn't know was what those would look like. And so that's why I designed my interview the way I did. Was I knew that codes would come out of that, but I just didn't know what they would be.
Now, another thing, and this is between the proposal in chapter 4 and 5, when you're in chapter 3, which is your methodology section with regard to data collection, analysis, and that type of thing, you know what you hope to accomplish during the proposal stage. So I guess my question is, how detailed did you get? Yes, you have to create the cookbook, but there are aspects of it that the surprises that will come when you actually enter into the process after approval. So was there a big difference between what you had in chapter 3 and what you had to outline in chapter 4?
Not honestly, it wasn't really that big of a difference. One of the biggest differences was the fact that I ended up coding my questionnaires. I didn't plan on doing that. But here I had, let me see, I have that in here, questionnaires. These were my questionnaires, and the responses. Obviously, so this is what I expected, easier. I expected that for most of the responses. But instead, I often got these big, long excerpts of information from these participants. And so that was an unexpected part of my data collection process. I didn't realize I was going to get that much. And so that changed a little bit. And so I'm going back and I'm redoing that part of my chapter 3 and just saying questionnaires will be coded as well, or were coded as well. And you have to go back and change all the verb tenses and everything. And aside from that, it really didn't change a whole lot. And it might change for others, but with a qualitative study, a lot of it is kind of open-ended. You're just describing how you're going to get the data and how you're going to analyze it. It's in chapter 4 that you start describing how it actually all came together.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good question.
Yes, very good question.
Hi, this is Mary McClendon.
Hi.
And I had a question. How many questions did you end up with for your questionnaire? And did you develop that number based on what you thought the participant would be willing to answer? I'm just trying to see,
I did.
how do you know what is enough, or what's not enough? Yeah.
I only asked 4 questions.
Really? In the questionnaire?
Yep. Now I had my resilience scale, and I used my resilience scale as part of my triangulation. I really wanted to find out what is the overall level of resilience. That's my first research question.
Mm-hmm.
What is the overall resilience level of doctoral graduates? And it's actually really interesting, and I put this in my chapter 4, but I didn't expect the scores on the questionnaires to line up with how often codes showed up, but they did.
Okay.
Because my resilience scale is split into different dimensions that line up pretty well with my research questions, just by happenstance. And some of the codes that, especially with coping mechanisms, came up a lot, that aligned a lot with higher scores in that question on the resilience scale. So it was just kind of interesting. But what I did to prepare my participants was I told them about how long it would take. I had my classmates test my survey monkey that I had developed and tell me how long it took them, and also give me just advice on how easy it was to navigate through it, things like that. So that helped. Ask for help from people, family, friends. It doesn't have to be somebody who's familiar with doctoral research. You just want people to tell you whether or not it worked. You're going to find little kinks in the process. So yeah, I asked 4 questions. Like I said, I wasn't expecting a lot from it, but I did get a lot from it. So, and I think my questionnaire, I told them it would take about 20 to 25 minutes in entirety to fill out. And I recruited 300 and got 60 responses.
Mm. So with 4 questions, it took them 20 to 25 minutes.
Yeah.
Mm.
Tops.
Okay.
Now, I think some of them took longer than that because some of them gave me quite a bit in the questionnaires. But if they were just going to give, like, this person probably took them 15 minutes to finish it, if that. Because I did demographics, the resilience skill is 25 items, and then the questions.
So in your Survey Monkey, does it show how long that participant took to create it?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I didn't look at that.
It should.
It should.
I know that Survey Methods does have that as a function, but I don't know about.
Yeah, here we go.
Yep. So she would be.
That person took an hour.
She wandered away and had a cup of coffee for a while.
Yeah, there we go. So this one took 13 minutes. This one took 8 minutes. 13, 11, 13. Yeah. So it doesn't take too much time at all. So
she could put that kind of information in her demographics information, saying this number of participants took about approximately X to Y to complete the survey. So it helps the person who wants to replicate understand how long does this take.
Yeah, and so really, I mean, honestly, it didn't take as long as I even had predicted. I'm going to some of the earlier ones. Yeah, this one didn't take very long at all. And I bet you if I were to try to look for their, I were to go in and look at their questionnaire responses, they were probably pretty small.
Yeah.
So, which is fine. And that's kind of what I was expecting. But, and the resilience scale, see, like this one, they spent 21 minutes, but they also didn't complete it. So they might have completed it in a different one or something.
Why did you say that you expected their responses to be pretty small?
Well, with the questionnaires, and this is just based off just knowing how much time somebody puts into something, I just didn't expect them to really put a whole lot of time into explaining it. I expected like one-word answers. I didn't expect complete sentences, which is what I got.
Well, the only reason I asked that question, and just to focus on my study for a moment, I'm utilizing 4 sources of data, right? And one of them is going to utilize a survey for qualitative purposes, like a Survey Monkey. Mm-hmm. And so the goal is to get them to give me, responses that are usable. And I understand that, especially depending on the age group that you're dealing with, you may get 1 or 2 word answers, and it also depends on the crafting of the questions that you asked them in the first place. So when you said that, it just kind of triggered me. It's like, well, no, I don't want you to say, oh, it was great, and that's it. Mm-hmm. So you want them to expand a bit.
So what you'll find is my questions, oh, I guess, I don't know. Let me go back to my table. So my questions were very open-ended. Keep them really open-ended, and you'll probably get more out of those. But like you said, it will depend on the demographic, age, and also, you know, explain yourself really clearly. You know, obviously, I know you're not going to be able to necessarily provide every single thing that you're trying to get out of the study because you don't want to prep them and give them things to say. But explain the importance of your study. Why is this so important? Because if you can get them to invest in it more, they're more likely to spend more time on it.
By the way, was there any type of incentive, like remuneration or anything offered to participants?
I didn't, and the only reason I didn't is because when I was looking at prior dissertations at GCU that used either GCU alumni or GCU students, the response rate was really high without incentives, and so I didn't feel the need to. However, I know some of my classmates have offered a raffle for a $50 Amazon gift card and things like that. That's not necessarily a guaranteed compensation, but the chances of something. And that might help, but I didn't.
So Bill, you asked a really provocative question. So I think what might help get people to answer more in a question would be da 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 period and why question mark. You know,
Yes.
or you know, you have something dot 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 because dot dot dot. So they have to do the part A and the part B in the question.
Well, right, and the way mine are framed right now, at least on the questionnaire part, because when you get into the interview and the focus group, well, then you have an opportunity to probe. But in the questionnaire, it's a fairly static document, and you're dependent upon them to just, you know, be willing to participate. So what I did do is I have the overarching question, and then I will say how or why, you know, to get them to give a bit more information or to signal to them that we need more information here in order to really add to this research.
And hopefully they're a critical thinker population that understands how or why.
Well, and Dr. Quaid knows my particular demographic happens to be late teens, early 20s. And so, and I don't want to slam my younger brothers and sisters, but they're the LOL generations.
Well, you just have to look at voter turnout from that age and know exactly what kind of response you can expect on your surveys. So, and you do have to keep that in mind.
I do.
I just happen to know that I was very likely to get a good response because our GCU graduates, of course, we're all amazing, right? So, and we want to help our fellow soon-to-be, you know, graduates that need help. And so, but you're not always going to be that lucky. And, you know, so those why questions, digging questions, and you'll even see, you know, that I ask more than one in here. They make it more difficult or easier. And like I said, my original intent with these was the questions 5 and 6 on here were, are you willing to participate in a video interview? And if so, can you provide your phone number and email? And those who said yes, I then looked at their questionnaires just to make sure that they weren't going to be kind of a dud in terms of interviewing them. You know, if they provided just real 1-2 word answers or said, nope, everything was beautiful during my entire program, I might have steered away from them a little bit because I didn't want them to just give me what they thought I wanted to hear. And so, you know, things like that. But honestly, I just got such a good response that I didn't even really need to use it for that purpose. So everybody really gave me some really good responses. And I think I just got really lucky. Not everybody's going to necessarily have that happen. So
the beautiful part about this presentation, Michelle, is that when people are working on chapters 1, 2, and 3, their heads are just so totally immersed in this. And then all of a sudden they get into the research and they go, whoa, what just happened here? And there's this whole other animal that I have to deal with, and I didn't expect that. So at least this is a wonderful way of helping the people to see what's that next step after proposal, that if you think about it in the proposal, it might make it an awful lot easier along the way.
Yeah. You know, and one bit of advice that I just thought of that I could give you, I'm going to just show you real quick in my chapter 4. And I didn't do this right the first time. I wrote about 20 pages of my chapter 4. And they're not in my chapter 4. So I'm hoping they will fit somewhere else, but I ended up scrapping all of it, at least from that.
Might go in an article.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to use it. I don't know how I'm going to use it, but I will use it. But that's because what I had done was I started writing before I started organizing.
Mm-hmm.
And so Dr. Mall kind of, she gave me a little bit of a lecture on that. Let me find. So I just wanted to give you an example. Rather than writing all of this is all my writing, I started putting these in. My little theme tables and the supporting quotes. And so I got all of my tables together first, and I put them in my chapter, and I used those to organize my thoughts. And then all I did was I described why did I put this table in here? What does it mean?
Yep.
And when I started doing that, it went so fast. I actually finished, if this is a 65-page chapter, including rubrics, but I finished, I would say, probably 35 of those pages in 3 days.
Yep.
Now, they were 3 very long, horrible days, but I think I spent 12 hours every day on it. But I mean, and it's just because I just wasn't doing it in a very efficient manner. And so, it really ended up working very well for me. And I also had, I have other tables in here. There we go. Here's my theme tables. So my codes supporting each theme. And this shows the data triangulation. And this is where I brought in my resilience scale. And by the way, the scores are out of 7. So the average score on identity was 6.52. And that happened to also show up a lot in my interviews. And so I thought that was probably important to show that the resilience scale supported the codes that I identified in my interviews. So even though it is a qualitative study, I cheated a little bit and I threw some quantitative data in there just for fun, just for descriptives. It's not externally valid, but maybe that's something that we can look into later on and start doing some more quantitative research with it.
So there's 2 things that come up right before we get off the call. One is you can kind of see that just how she's describing her process, that when you start getting into this phase, you're going to get so tired. So it's like, that's the time when to think about, I'm going to give this to an editor who's going to make it really read well. So it's just, try and think about how can you give yourself a break when you're in this part, because it can be pretty intense.
Yeah, it is grueling. It is emotionally, mentally, and physically exhausting. So I spent a long day writing last weekend, and the next day was very sick. And so, it just happens. And, and your plans are never going to come out the way you thought. You're going to make plans. I had planned to write all weekend, and Sunday I couldn't even lift my head off my pillow. I was so sick. Mm-hmm. And so, you just have to adjust, and that's where, yes, ask for help. And if you can't pay somebody, ask a family member who has a degree to just read through it, even if they can't edit all the little grammar and syntax, even if they can just tell you, does this make sense? That can even be really helpful, and anybody can do that. So remember, somebody with I think a 12th grade reading level is supposed to be able to understand your dissertation. So hand it to your high schooler and ask them if they understand what it means.
So any last questions? Gonna do a quick file through and see if anybody unmutes. Oh, there we go. Oh, good thumbs up for everyone. Worth a Thursday night. Next month for March, instead of having it be on March 1, I may move it up one day and have it be the last day of February, just because March 1 is a killer for me. That's the only reason. So I've reached out to somebody to see if she would be a guest speaker, and it's going to be on how do you deal with stress when you're so Michelle says, I'll be on that call. Or I'll be done already. So
you better be done already.
So I'm trying to work around the gal schedule, but it's, I think, going to be really helpful for you all because there is a level of resiliency here. You know, you just keep pumping along, and all of a sudden you smack into this wall, and you go, I'm sick. I'm sick. And that's usually how it shows up, is I'm sick. So it's that resilience recovery factor, and that's when you get to moan to me, and then I'll say, okay, now that's fine. You're done moaning. Get back to work. 5 minutes of moaning. Everybody can just go moan, and then we're done. Good.
Well, and you know what? My entire dissertation is on factors of resilience which contribute to online doctoral success. So in 2-3 months, take a look at it on ProQuest.
Well, we'll ask you for a copy and we'll send it out. How's that?
Absolutely. It'll
awesome.
be there.
Awesome. And then we're going to be there to celebrate you walking across the stage.
Yes.
Yes, with a big party afterwards. Yes. Thank you, Michelle. Yes?
I just want to say thank you because everything what you say is, I mean, touched me a lot, you know, because it's very hard. It's very hard journey, and it's I have to give it to an editor at the end because I was like getting crazy. I was hating everybody. I started hating everything, myself, everything. So I think it's very, I mean, it's a monster. It's a very hard journey, and I'm very proud of you, Michelle. You have been doing a great job, and thank you for sharing. You did amazing job, and thank you.
Yeah. And know that we have every level of confidence that all of you will be moving right along the same way. How's that?
Thank you. Can I chime in before we sign out?
Yes.
I do want to say thank you because I kept being very resistant to an editor, not for financial reasons, because I want this to be my own product. But I realized I've got to get the other experts that I know to put polish on this finished product. So I'm on board now with getting an editor.
You can make it your own if you want to, but yes.
Thank you.
Yep. So everyone, I'll post this in Dropbox, and Michelle will send me her PowerPoint and any other things that she wants to throw in there, and we'll just put them in there, and you can go back and watch it as needed. So thanks for giving up an evening. Okay. Night all. Michelle, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Good luck, everybody.
Yep.